What does it mean to be human? If I was to ask each person in this audience what their answer was, I'd probably get some very different responses. Perhaps for some, it means to have evolved from the cells that created all life, something simply biological. Perhaps for another, it's being a species that interacts and cares for each other. For the current high school student, it might be the quality of sleep deprivation, but that's another TED Talk. No matter what your personal definition of being human is, we can agree that we as humans have our ups and downs, right? I'm sure you've all experienced something that causes you stress. Presentations, failed or failing relationships, early, middle, late life crises, it's all a part of life. We face adversity and we experience stress as a very normal part of the human experience. Whether you're a student stressed about grades or an adult stressed about life, we face stress on an almost everyday level, and for the most part, that's out of our control. You don't get to choose when something totally rocks your world. Adversity wouldn't really be adversity if you expected it. However, the way we react to these situations is in our control, and they can change everything about how the way the situation affects your health. The way we see, what we feel, and experience can be what determines the ultimate outcome of the situation. So why do we continue to see stress as something to be avoided as if it has the plague? Okay, let's back up. Hi, I'm Aurora Zoeteway. I'm a freshman here, and don't worry, I'm not one of those people who's like a vending machine of happy, helpful, but honestly annoying advice. I'm not here to tell you that stress is the best thing in your life, or that moving somewhere or doing something completely new shouldn't come with its own set of challenges, or that that meeting you have coming up shouldn't cause you dread because it's going to teach you some really important life lessons. I'm not even here to tell you you should always appreciate stress. After all, studies have shown that constant or chronic stress can result in physical or mental health issues. My purpose here is genuinely simple. In the next 10 minutes, I want to change your mind, or at least make you consider the way you view stress and adversity and how it affects your life. So raise your hand if you're feeling stressed today, yesterday, or any time this week. That's a lot of us. It's almost like I knew that before I asked you. So clearly, stress is something we're all familiar with. But what is stress? Well, biologically, stress is your body's response to a situation that requires you to make a choice that could affect whether or not you live. But we don't find ourselves in situations like that much anymore. So beyond the biological response, what is the emotion that we call stress? And why do we continue to label it as a bad thing? Before we can take a look at what stress is, we need to understand what positive emotions are. So what is the most general positive emotion you can think of? If I had to guess, you're probably thinking happiness. Happiness is probably the most normally experienced thing that we feel as humans. But what is happiness? I'm going to warn you, I'm about to go on about this. Because even if you think that you know what happiness means, I want you to consider it for a second. What's your personal definition of happiness? What's yours? Do you think that everybody in the room would agree with your personal definition? Do you think that everyone in the world would agree with your definition? Let's try looking at the internet, specifically Google. So, you Google the definition of happiness. This is what comes up. Turns out, the Oxford Dictionary defines happiness as the state of being happy. I know, what a shocker. It also defines sadness as the condition or quality of being sad. You remember when people told you don't always believe what you see on the internet? This is why. I mean, with 5-star definitions, like these, how is anybody supposed to know when they're feeling happy or sad? If being happy is quite literally the textbook definition of happiness, then what should happiness look like? Let's try again. If you scroll down your typical internet page, you'll find the question and answer section. It looks like this. It's typically going to have 4 to 6 questions, and some of them will be, what's the pure definition of happiness? What's the real definition of happiness? And what are the 4 types of happiness? Okay, so now I have questions about the questions. For starters, how can a definition of an emotion be fake? And there's 4 types of happiness? It's official. I'm lost. The point that I'm getting at here with the questions and answers is that emotions, while they might have your typical Google definition, mean different things for everyone. But so many people out there, influencers, companies, normal people, they put out their routines and rules as happiness. This is what you have to do to be happy. How to know when you're happy. People start to think that what works for others should work for everyone, including them. This is where we start to get lost. Now that I've done this experiment with you, let's take it back to stress. I did almost the same thing with the word stress, only I asked for something a little bit more specific, and I found this page. If you look at all of those, they are quite negative. They are all consequences to your health. But I didn't ask for consequences. I didn't put the word negative when I searched for the effects of stress. Surely there are good effects, and there are, I promise, or this TED Talk would be strange, that I should be able to see. But I don't see them when I just put in stress. So why is it that I'm overwhelmed by the bad effects, but I have to wade through the masses for the good ones? Truthfully, even if we don't want to admit it, most people have a predetermined bias against stress because we're constantly hearing about ways to decrease it or avoid it all the time. But what if I was to tell you that all of that was changing? What if I was to tell you that stress can actually be one of the healthiest things for you, if managed properly? When you really think about it, there's a lot of ways to consider healthy stress. Deadlines, for example, can push a person to do something they may not have done because they're stressed about it from another person. Competition can make or break athletes because of the stress they're feeling from the other competitors to do better. And it's not just me telling you this. Modern scientific studies are backing it up, and I want to show you some. In the article Stress and Health, Psychological, Behavioral, and Biological Determinants, wow, that's a mouthful, stress is defined as anything that seriously threatens homeostasis. While there's nothing in the title that specifically indicates that stress was found as good or bad, it also describes stress using the words threats, coping mechanisms, and stress responses. All of its sources were published before 1990, and the article itself was published in 2008. Its general take is that stress is bad for you. However, if you look a little bit deeper, it also states that acute stress responses in young, healthy individuals may be adaptive and typically do not impose a health burden. Well, that beat around the bush a little bit, but I think it gets the point across. Then, in its very next sentence, it states, however, if the threat is unremitting, particularly in older or unhealthy individuals, the long-term effects of stress can damage health. Then, it goes on to talk about the bad effects of stress and why they are worse depending on the person. So I know you might be wondering why I'm giving you a source that actively disproves my argument. I would be too. But often, I feel like there are two sides to any argument. Neither one of them is necessarily right. This source explores one of them. But my main point with this source is that it was published in 2008, 16 years ago now, and its general take is that stress is bad for you. So let's take a look at another article. In an article published in the Berkeley Wellness Letter of 2015, a student interviewed a professor who was studying the effects of stress, Daniela Koffer. She said that while stress often gets a bad rap, she was discovering that it had powerful benefits, such as improvements in alertness, performance, and memory. She stated that while she was studying, she came to the fact that manageable stress increases alertness and performance, and by encouraging the stem cells that become brain cells, stress improves memory. She came to these results after conducting a study on rats, where they were exposed to stress and then studied afterwards. The result of this study is that the rats grew more brain cells that kept them alert and cognitive, therefore keeping them alive in the wild. From her work on rats, she believes the same happens in humans. When she was asked when too much stress becomes negative, she says that it varies from person to person, and, this is where it all ties into my TEDx, it depends partially on perception. She says that people who feel resilient and confident that they can manage stress are much less likely to have a negative reaction and much more likely to have a positive reaction to stress. Then, when she was asked how you could make sure the effects were positive instead of negative, she also stated that if you tend to have a positive attitude, a self-confident sense that you can get through a rough period, you're more likely to have a good reaction to stress than if you perceive stress as catastrophic. And this study was published in 2015. That is not to say that there are not so many studies out there since those 9 years that have passed since 2015. There's lots of new research coming out every single day. And if this interests you, I highly recommend you go and look for some, because the results are amazing. But I chose to use a study from 2015 because I wanted to make sure that I had a strong argument backed on good evidence, especially when presenting in front of a big audience like this one. So, now that you have the science, you might be wondering, why does this matter? And why am I, a 15-year-old, the one to tell you about it? The truth is, I feel like anybody could stand up on a stage and talk about an experience they had where they faced adversity. Not that you would necessarily want to. But I feel like very few people talk about what happens after the experience, whether or not you feel like it made you a better person, a stronger one. My mother has been trying to tell me for years that self-reflection is one of the most important things you can do for your mental health. But I don't think I really understood what she meant until I learned the lesson for myself. I'm a freshman, as you may remember, so this was my first year of high school. This is a pretty common transition period for most people. However, when I came to Seabury, I was lucky enough that I'd also been here for middle school. I didn't have to learn 80 new names or make completely new friends, but that didn't exactly make it easy. I am a multifaceted person. I love a lot of things, and for most of my life, I was always doing more than one activity at once. Then I got to high school, and I was expected to commit to just one thing. And honestly, I stumbled. While I'd been doing both dance and cross-country in the fall of 8th grade, I ended up quitting both for different reasons and joining the musical. I wanted to join the musical, because who doesn't? So that wasn't really the hard part of the choice. But then I still needed a PE credit, and I wanted to try something new. So I ended up in the lowest level of volleyball, which I was generally bad at, had no friends in, and honestly, I didn't know anything about it. So in the span of a few weeks, it kind of felt like the world had been ripped out from under my feet. I'd been so confident that I'd be doing something that I already knew how to do, and that would be what grounded me in this transition, but that wasn't the case. Everyone around me was mostly supportive, but you could tell they were thinking, what is she doing? I had done dance since before middle school, and cross-country since I was 6. All of my friends were there. So when I chose to do something that wasn't about anybody else, it wasn't for them, not their expectations, not about what they were doing. I made the choice for me, and honestly, it was really hard. I spent a lot of time thinking while I waited for the musical. Didn't really see my friends as much, but I always got my homework done. And for a while, it was challenging. But I began to build a new community in the musical. I thought about my decisions and what they meant to me, and I realized that I was where I wanted to be. It took almost until our performance, but I found my feet and my confidence in my choice. And I'd do all the bad moments over again to experience the good ones. So you might be thinking, not much of a stressful experience. You have so many great options that you can't choose between them. Boo-hoo, right? But I choose to believe that it's not about how hard the experience is, or really the reasons why you got there, or how long it lasted. What matters are the lessons that you choose to learn afterwards. What matters is the mindset you take every day as you wake up and work towards a time that makes you happier. After everything studied out in my life, I began to feel a little bit different, as if the experience had actually changed me for the better. It's what inspired me to do this TED Talk. It's what made me want to share these lessons. My experience taught me self-motivation. It taught me grit, and it reminded me that sometimes you have to fall before you land on your feet. It reminded me that making choices for yourself can be the best kind of choices, even when they're hard. And more than anything, it forced me to wake up every single day and work to be positive. I created mantras, or I took up habits, or I did little things because it was the way to stay positive, even about things that weren't necessarily that great. I talked to myself, I worked at it until when everything steadied out, I found that I didn't have to try as much. My mantras had become a natural part of the way I managed stress and faced adversity in my everyday life. So the moral of my story is this. Adversity and stress can teach you some of the most important lessons you'll ever learn. But the only reason that I learned these lessons, the only reason that I'm standing on this stage talking to you, is because I chose to see the stress that I was feeling as good. I chose to see the adversity that I faced as something that would make me stronger, because it did. And that strength came from the positive mindset in which I viewed stress in. What I'm trying to say, with the experience and the science in my story, is that stress and adversity are influential things in life. They make you stronger. They made me stronger, and they continue to do so. We have to stop seeing stress as something to be afraid of. Embrace it, work through it, find new ways to stay positive, maybe just a little bit every day. Yes, stress is pressure, and pressure is scary. People are afraid that they'll crack under that much pressure. So was I. I was scared that under the weight of my own decisions, I wouldn't be strong enough to continue. But that wasn't the case. I took that chance on myself, and I'll forever be glad that I did, because pressure is also change. If you choose to embrace that change, even when it's hard, I promise the experience will have good effects on your life. But I can't make that choice for you. I do hope that what I've shared with you today, even if you slept through part of it, will make you consider the way you see stress and adversity in your life. I hope that you'll create a mantra, or take up a habit, or simply work to be positive every day, because you never know. It might just change your life. Thank you.